The ghost in the machine of Jack Callahan's memory wore the face of Sergeant Liam Kelly, grinning just before the world dissolved into fire and thunder. That was the last real thing Jack remembered clearly. Everything after was a smear of dust, the coppery tang of blood, and the high, keening shriek of twisted metal. They'd pulled him from the wreckage of the Humvee, a broken puppet with its strings cut, the lone survivor. The official report was a sterile, bureaucratic lie. One SEAL, KIA. One MWD, Rex, also KIA. One SEAL, Jack Callahan, WIA. Life-altering injuries. The report never mentioned the shrapnel that had carved itself a home in his soul. Now, years later, the derelict farmhouse his grandfather had left him was his tomb. He was a ghost haunting his own life, a specter rattling the chains of what-ifs in the hollow chambers of his heart. The Pennsylvania winds of November were a cruel, biting thing, a physical manifestation of the cold that had taken up permanent residence in his bones. The farm was a graveyard of failures. Rusted tractors slumped in the tall, dead grass like skeletal remains of prehistoric beasts. The barn leaned with the weary sigh of old age, its paint peeled away to reveal the raw, silvered wood beneath, a testament to time's relentless assault. His own body was a similar ruin. A web of scars mapped his torso and left leg, a permanent reminder of the IED that had stolen his team, his career, his future. He moved with a limp that was more than physical. It was a hitch in his spirit, a stutter in his will to live. Mornings were the worst. He'd wake up from nightmares of sand and screams, the phantom smell of cordite in his nostrils, the weight of Liam's dog tags, which he kept in a splintered wooden box by his bed, pressing down on his chest like a physical weight. He didn't work. He didn't speak to anyone unless absolutely necessary. The disability checks from the Navy were enough to keep the lights on and cheap whiskey in his glass. He was a man waiting for an ending, but the final chapter refused to write itself. He existed in the spaces between breaths, in the long, silent hours, between sunset and the false promise of dawn. The world outside his neglected fence line had moved on, but Jack was still trapped in that sun-scorched ditch in Kandahar, forever trying to claw his way back to his brothers. He'd been a hunter of men, a whisper in the dark, a tool of honed violence for his country. He had moved with a deadly grace through the world's most dangerous places, his senses tuned to the faintest whisper of threat. Now those same senses were a curse. The snap of a twig in the woods was a sniper's rifle. The backfire of a truck on the distant highway was the crump of a mortar. Every shadow held a phantom enemy. He was at war, but the battlefield was his own mind, and he was losing. The house smelled of dust, neglect, and the faint, sour aroma of his own despair. He hadn't bothered to unpack the boxes that held the remnants of his civilian life. They were stacked in the living room like a barricade against a world he no longer understood or wanted to be a part of. He ate canned soup, cold from the can, standing over the sink. He slept in fits and starts, often jolting awake with his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He was 29 years old and felt 1,000. The man he had been, the confident, capable warrior, the loyal friend, had died in that Humvee. Only this hollowed-out shell remained, an echo in an empty house. Tonight the storm was a living thing, clawing at the farmhouse with icy talons. Rain lashed against the window panes in violent, horizontal sheets, and the wind howled through the eaves like a chorus of the damned. It was 3 a.m. In this sleep was a foreign country he had no passport for. He sat in the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the lightning bleach the world white for a split second, revealing the skeletal fingers of the trees clawing at the bruised purple sky. It was in one of those brief, silent moments between thunderclaps that he heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the groaning of the old house. It was a sound that didn't belong. A low, desperate whimper, almost swallowed by the gale. And then another sound, a rhythmic, frantic thumping. It was coming from the edge of his property, near the crumbling remains of an old stone wall that separated his land from the overgrown woods beyond. His training, buried under layers of trauma and apathy, stirred. It was a flicker of a pilot light in a cold, dead engine. Analyze, identify, act. He set the glass down. The sound was wrong. It was a sound of pain, of struggle. Something was out there, suffering in the storm. For the first time in a long time, something other than his own ghosts had breached the perimeter of his self-imposed isolation. He pulled on his worn leather boots, the simple act feeling alien and deliberate. He grabbed a heavy maglite from a hook by the door, its metal body cold and solid in his hand. He didn't bother with the jacket. The cold was a familiar enemy, one he understood. He stepped out onto the porch, and the wind hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Rain plastered his thin t-shirt to his skin instantly. He swept the beam of the flashlight across the yard, cutting a bright, sharp cone through the churning darkness. The beam landed on the old stone wall. The thumping sound was clearer now, accompanied by that heart-wrenching whimper. It was the sound of an animal in profound distress. He moved toward it, his limp more pronounced on the slick, muddy ground. Every step was a conscious effort, a fight against the inertia that had held him captive for so long. As he got closer, the beam picked out a shape huddled against the base of the wall. A dog. A large German shepherd, its fur matted and soaked, its frame skeletal. A heavy rusted chain was wrapped around its neck, the other end bolted to a stake driven deep into the ground. The thumping was the sound of its tail, a desperate, instinctual beat against the muddy earth. But it was the eyes that stopped him cold. When the dog lifted its head, the beam of the maglite caught them, and Jack felt the air leave his lungs. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were the eyes of a soldier. He saw in their depths the same haunted, hollowed-out look he saw in his own reflection every morning. It was a look of profound betrayal, of pain so deep it had burned away everything else. This creature was as broken as he was, a fellow ghost. The dog wasn't growling, it wasn't baring its teeth. It just watched him, its body trembling from cold and fear, a low, continuous whimper escaping its throat. Jack saw the raw, chafed flesh around its neck where the chain had dug in. He saw the ribs starkly defined beneath its wet fur. He saw the raw, scraped pads of its paws, where it had been trying to dig itself free. Someone had done this. Someone had chained this magnificent animal to a post and left it to die in the storm. A feeling Jack hadn't experienced in years began to smolder in the pit of his stomach. It was cold, clean, and sharp. It was rage. "Easy, boy," Jack said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp, unused to speaking. He kept the beam of the light pointed slightly away from the dog's face, not wanting to spook it further. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Who did this to you?" he whispered into the wind. A flicker of movement from the road caught his eye. A rusted-out pickup truck was parked haphazardly, its engine off. As he watched, a figure emerged from the driver's side, a hulking silhouette against the darkness, pulling the hood of a sweatshirt over his head. The figure started walking, not toward the road, but toward the wall, toward the dog. Well, look what we got here," a voice slurred, carried on the wind. "Enjoying the storm, you worthless mutt." The man was tall and heavy-set, with a face that looked like it had been on the losing end of too many fights. He reeked of cheap beer and casual cruelty. This was the Tier 1 antagonist. This was Silas. Silas hadn't seen Jack yet, hidden as he was in the deeper shadows beyond the flashlight's main beam. He kicked at the dog, a lazy, contemptuous motion. The dog flinched and pressed itself against the cold stones of the wall, the whimper turning into a pained yelp. That was the moment the old Jack Callahan, the seal, woke from his long slumber. He didn't think, he moved. He closed the distance in 3 silent strides, his limp momentarily forgotten, replaced by the predator's fluid grace. "Get away from the dog." Jack's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used right before the world ended for his enemies. Silas spun around, startled. His eyes, wide and stupid, tried to make sense of the figure that had materialized out of the storm. "Who the hell are you? This ain't your property." "You're on my land," Jack said, his gaze as hard and cold as the November rain. "And that's my business. Step away from the dog. Now." He centered the maglight's beam directly on Silas's face, blinding him. Silas squinted, raising a hand to shield his eyes. This is my dog. Found him wandering. Gonna make me some money. You got no right. A dog you chained to a stake to die in a storm, Jack stated, not a question. You have no rights here. Arrogance born of ignorance puffed up Silas's chest. He took a step forward, trying to use his size to intimidate. You'd best walk away, old man, before you get hurt. He swung a clumsy, telegraphed punch. It was laughably slow. Jack moved his head an inch, the fist sailing past his ear. He didn't retaliate with a punch. He didn't need to. He simply stepped inside Silas's clumsy momentum, brought the heavy end of the maglite up in a short, sharp arc, and cracked it against the man's wrist. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Silas screamed, a high, pathetic sound, cradling his broken wrist. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and pain. The fight was over before it began. I told you to step away, Jack said, his voice still unnervingly calm. Now you're going to leave. You're going to get in your truck and you're never coming back to this property. Do you understand me? Silas, whimpering, nodded frantically, his bravado shattered. He scrambled back to his truck, fumbling with the door handle with his good hand, and sped away, his tires spitting mud. The night was quiet again, save for the storm and the soft whimpering from the base of the wall. Jack turned back to the dog. The animal had watched the entire exchange, its head cocked, its intelligent eyes tracking every move. The trembling had lessened slightly. Jack knelt in the mud, ignoring the cold seeping into his jeans. It's okay, he said softly. The bad man is gone. He examined the chain. It was thick, the bolt on the stake rusted tight. He went back to the barn, the dog's eyes following him the entire way. He returned with a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. He approached the dog slowly, showing it the tool, letting it sniff the cold metal. I'm going to get you out of this, he murmured. Just stay calm. He positioned the cutters around the chain link. With a grunt of effort, born of dormant strength, he squeezed the handles. The metal groaned in protest, and then, with a loud snap that echoed in the night, the link broke. The dog was free. But it didn't run. It stayed put, looking at the broken chain, then at Jack, a deep uncertainty in its gaze. It was institutionalized by its abuse, conditioned to its prison. Come on, Jack said, his voice gentle. Let's get you out of this rain. He didn't try to touch it. He just stood up and started walking slowly toward the barn, not looking back. He knew from experience with scared wild things, both man and animal, that you don't force them, you invite them. You show them a path to safety and let them choose to take it. He heard the soft padding of paws on the wet ground behind him. The dog was following, keeping a safe distance, a silent shadow in the storm. For the first time in years, Jack Callahan wasn't walking alone. Inside the relative warmth of the barn, the air was thick with the scent of old hay, dust, and dry earth. Jack switched on a single bare bulb, casting a pool of pale yellow light. He laid out some old horse blankets in an empty stall, creating a makeshift bed. The dog hesitated at the threshold, one paw raised, sniffing the air, its eyes darting around the cavernous space. Jack didn't push. He went to the house and came back with a bowl of fresh water and some leftover canned beef stew. He placed them just inside the stall. It's yours, he said quietly, then backed away, sitting on an overturned bucket just outside the stall, giving the animal space. He watched as the dog, after a long, tense moment, finally crept into the stall. It ignored the food at first, drinking the water with a desperate thirst, its tongue lapping noisily. Then cautiously it approached the food and began to eat, not with the frantic hunger of a stray, but with a strange, deliberate focus. As the dog ate, Jack studied it more closely. Beneath the mud and emaciation, it was a magnificent animal. It had the classic German shepherd build, the deep chest, the powerful shoulders, the intelligent, alert head. But it was the way it carried itself, even in this broken state, that struck him. There was a discipline to its movements, a ghost of formal training. He saw something then, as the dog turned its head, a faint, dark marking on the inside of its ear. Jack's heart gave a painful lurch. He'd seen tattoos like that before, on military working dogs. He waited until the dog had finished eating and had curled up on the blankets. its shivering finally subsiding into a deep, exhausted sleep. He approached the stall slowly, his boots silent on the dusty concrete floor. He knelt beside the sleeping animal, his movements slow and non-threatening. The dog's ear twitched, but it didn't wake. It was utterly spent. With a hand that trembled slightly, Jack gently touched the dog's ear, folding it back to get a better look at the tattoo. The numbers and letters were faded but legible. A military identification code. His breath hitched in his throat. This confirmed it. This was a soldier, a veteran, just like him, cast aside and left to die. He sat back on his heels, a wave of cold dread and dawning, impossible recognition washing over him. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He scrolled through old photos, images from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He found the one he was looking for, a picture from Kandahar. Him and Liam, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera, young and invincible. And sitting proudly at Liam's feet was Rex, his German Shepherd partner, the best damn explosives detection dog in the entire battalion. Jack zoomed in on the photo, on Rex's alert, happy face. He looked at the markings, the specific way the black saddle on his back curved. He looked back at the sleeping dog in his barn, the same markings. He then looked at the tattoo in Rex's ear in the photo, a clearer version of the faded ink on the dog before him. It was him. It was Rex. The report had been a lie. KIA, killed in action. But he was here, battered, starved, and renamed. A cheap collar around his neck read Kaiser, but alive. Liam's partner, the dog who had saved his life a dozen times by sniffing out the IEDs that littered their path. The dog he had thought was lost forever in the same blast that took Liam. A tremor went through Jack's body, a sob catching in his throat, raw and painful. He had mourned this dog. He had mourned him along with Liam, another ghost to add to his collection. And all this time, he'd been alive, suffering. The rage from earlier returned, but now it was a white-hot, focused inferno. Someone had not only left a soldier behind, but had stolen him, sold him, and sentenced him to a slow, miserable death. He stayed there for a long time, kneeling in the dust of the barn, a silent vigil over the sleeping survivor. The storm outside began to fade, giving way to the gray, watery light of dawn. In the quiet of the morning, a promise formed in Jack's heart. The first real commitment he had made to anything since the day he lost his team. "I'm going to make this right, Rex," he whispered to the sleeping dog. "I swear on Liam's memory, I'll make it right." The war wasn't over. It had just followed him home. By morning, the dog, Rex, he would only ever be Rex to Jack, was weak but stable. The first order of business was getting him proper medical care. Jack found the number for the nearest veterinary clinic in the next town over. The voice on the phone was professional and calm. Dr. Eris Thorne. She agreed to see them immediately. Luring Rex into his old Ford F-150 was a challenge. The dog was wary of enclosed spaces, another ghost of the Humvee they both shared. Jack didn't force him. He simply opened the passenger door, laid one of the warm blankets on the seat, and sat in the driver's side, waiting. After 10 minutes of quiet patience, Rex cautiously leaped in, settling onto the blanket with a heavy sigh. The clinic was clean, modern, and smelled of bleach and antiseptic, a sterile scent that did little to calm Jack's frayed nerves. Dr. Eris Thorne was not what he expected. She was sharp and observant, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than just the surface. She took in Jack's scarred appearance and Rex's battered state with a professional mask, but he saw a flicker of deep concern behind it. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice gentle as she began her examination. Rex, surprisingly, allowed her to touch him, though his body remained tense. "I found him chained up on my property last night, abused," Jack said, his words clipped. He didn't offer any more. "Doctor." Thorne worked efficiently, her hands skilled and confident. "He's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and has multiple contusions. That wound on his neck is infected. He's also got a few cracked ribs. This is deliberate cruelty." She looked up at Jack, her professional mask cracking. "Thank you for bringing him in." As she was cleaning the wound on Rex's neck, the clinic's front door burst open, the bell above it jangling violently. It was Silas, his arm now in a crude sling, his face a mask of furious indignation. He had 2 other men with him, both cut from the same greasy bottom-feeder cloth. "There he is. That's my dog," Silas shouted, pointing a grubby finger at Rex. "And that's the psycho who assaulted me and stole him." Dr. Thorne straightened up, placing herself between Silas and the examination table. "Sir, you need to calm down. This is a medical facility." Jack moved to stand beside her. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Silas, his expression flat and dangerous. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "I want my dog, and I'm pressing charges," Silas blustered, though he kept a safe distance, clearly remembering the sharp, painful lesson from the night before. "He's not your dog," Jack said, his voice a low rumble. "He's a stolen veteran of the United States military, and you're a piece of filth who tortures animals for profit." The accusation hung in the air. Silas's face went pale. "You're crazy. I bought him fair and square." "From who?" Jack pressed, taking a slow step forward. Before Silas could answer, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside the clinic. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was handsome in a cold, reptilian way, his movements precise and controlled. He walked into the clinic as if he owned it. Jack's internal threat assessment meter went from yellow to blood red. This was not a thug. This was a professional. "Silas, you incompetent moron," the man said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. He didn't even glance at Jack or the doctor. His eyes were fixed on Rex. "I told you to keep him quiet and out of sight." At the sound of the man's voice, Dr. Thorne froze. "Marcus," she whispered, her face draining of color. The man, Marcus, finally turned to look at her, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Hello, little sister. Cleaning up another stray, I see." He then turned his cold, calculating gaze to Jack. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. That asset is a piece of misplaced inventory. I'll be taking him back now, and you," he said to Silas, "are finished." Jack positioned himself squarely in front of Rex. "His name is Rex. He's a military working dog, and he's not going anywhere with you." Marcus chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." He snapped his fingers. From a van that had pulled up behind his sedan, 2 more men emerged. They were not like Silas's friends. These men were hard, disciplined. They moved like soldiers, or mercenaries. They carried concealed weapons, but their posture screamed lethal intent. "The dog," Marcus said, his voice dropping the pretense of civility. "Hand him over, or we can do this the hard way. Your clinic is rather isolated out here, Eris. Accidents happen." That was it. The threat against Eris. Jack's world narrowed to a single point of focus. Protect. The mission parameters were clear. Neutralize the threat, protect the innocent, save the soldier. "Eris," Jack said, his voice low and urgent, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "Lock the front door, now. Call 911. Tell them shots fired." She stared at him for a second, then at her brother's cold face, and the resolve hardened in her eyes. She ran to the door and threw the bolt. Silas and his 2 goons, suddenly realizing they were horribly out of their depth, began to panic. "You've just made a very serious mistake," Marcus said, as his men drew their pistols, equipped with suppressors. "No," Jack replied, grabbing a heavy stainless steel surgical tray from a nearby counter. "You did. You left a soldier behind." The first merc moved fast, trying to flank him. Jack didn't hesitate. He threw the steel tray like a discus. It spun through the air and hit the man square in the face with a sickening crunch. The man went down, his weapon clattering to the floor. The second merc raised his pistol. The sound of the suppressed shot was a sharp thud. But Rex, reacting to the familiar sound and the sudden violent movements, exploded into action. He launched himself from the table, a 70-pound projectile of fur and fury, and hit the second merc in the chest, knocking him backward over a row of chairs. Jaws that could snap bone clamped down on the man's gun arm. In that split second of chaos, Jack moved. He vaulted over the reception desk, using the momentary cover to close the distance to Marcus. Silas and his friends were scrambling for the back exit, Useless and terrified, Marcus, caught off guard by the ferocity of both Jack and the dog, raised his own weapon, but Jack was already there. He slammed into Marcus, driving him back against the wall. The gun went off, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling plaster. Jack disarmed him with a swift, brutal wrist lock, the same move he'd used on Silas, but with far more force. The pistol fell to the floor. He didn't kill him. He could have, easily. But in Eris's horrified eyes, he saw a reason not to. He subdued Marcus with a series of precise, debilitating strikes to his joints, leaving him conscious but incapacitated on the floor, groaning in agony. The clinic was a wreck. One merc was unconscious, the other was being held at bay by a snarling Rex, and Marcus was neutralized. The distant wail of sirens grew closer, grew. Jack stood in the middle of the chaos, his chest heaving. Rex came to his side, nudging his hand, a low whine in his throat. Jack put a hand on the dog's head. Good boy, Rex, good boy. The aftermath was a bureaucratic nightmare. Police swarmed the clinic. Statements were taken. Marcus, his men, and Silas's crew were all taken into custody. But the victory felt hollow. A stern-faced woman from County Animal Control arrived, her clipboard a weapon of cold, unfeeling authority. The animal was involved in a violent altercation, she said, refusing to make eye contact with Jack. It will have to be impounded as evidence. And given its aggression, it will be evaluated. It will likely have to be euthanized. You can't, Eris pleaded. He was defending himself. He was defending us. Regulations are regulations, the woman said flatly. The dog is a liability. Jack felt a cold despair wash over him. To have found Rex, to have survived this fight, only to lose him to a pen pusher and a lethal injection. The injustice was a physical sickness. He was cornered, out of options. The system he had fought for was about to kill the one living piece of his past he had left. He made one last desperate call. He dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. It rang twice before a familiar, authoritative voice answered. Thompson. Commander, Jack said, his own voice sounding broken to his ears. It's Callahan. I'm in trouble, and I need your help. He explained everything, his words tumbling out in a torrent, finding Rex, the fight, the corrupt handler, the bureaucrat about to sign Rex's death warrant. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a heart-stopping moment, Jack thought his old CO would dismiss him as a crazy, rambling vet. Stay put, son, Commander Thompson said finally, his voice like iron. Don't let them take that dog. I'm on my way. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of tense standoffs, with Jack refusing to let the animal control officer near Rex, and Eris backing him up with every legal argument she could think of. Just as the local sheriff was about to lose his patience and arrest Jack for obstruction, a black helicopter descended from the sky, landing in the field behind the clinic. Commander Thompson emerged, still in his uniform, his presence radiating an authority that dwarfed everyone else's. He strode into the clinic, flanked by 2 military police officers. He took one look at Rex, who stood and gave a short, sharp bark of recognition. My God, Thompson whispered. He knelt down. Rex, it is you. He looked at the faded tattoo in the dog's ear. He then turned to the animal control officer. This animal is not a stray. This is Master-at-Arms Rex, a decorated veteran of the United States Navy. He is a victim of a federal crime, and he is now back in the custody of the Department of Defense. He handed a file to the stunned sheriff. This is Marcus Thorne, a disgraced contractor we've been investigating for months. He's been falsifying MWD service records, listing dogs as KIA, and selling them to dogfighting syndicates. Master-at-Arms Rex was his first and biggest mistake. We just couldn't prove it. Until now. The full, ugly story came out. Thorne had been Liam's handler before Jack's team deployed. He'd seen Rex's value. After the IED blast and the chaos, he'd reported Rex as killed, smuggled him out, and sold him for a fortune. The dog had passed through several brutal hands before ending up with Silas. He had escaped, and by some miracle of instinct or memory, had been drawn to the one place on Earth where he might find a scent of his old pack, the home of Liam's best friend. Commander Thompson looked at Jack, his eyes filled with a deep, sad understanding. Liam filed a dozen complaints about Thorne's handling of Rex. He knew something was wrong with the man. He was trying to protect his partner. He placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. You finished his last mission, son. You brought his boy home. The bureaucratic red tape was cut with the sword of military authority. Custody of Rex was transferred, not to the military, but officially and permanently to Jack. Thompson had pulled every string he had. He's earned his retirement, the commander said, a rare smile touching his lips. And so have you. The Navy owes you both that much. In the quiet of the clinic, after everyone had left, Eris finally turned to Jack. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with shame and sorrow. Marcus is my brother, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We haven't spoken in years. I knew he was corrupt, but I never imagined this. I'm so sorry, Jack. It's not your fault, Jack said, and he meant it. You helped save him. That's all that matters. A year later, the farm was no longer a tomb. It was coming back to life, slowly, painstakingly. A new roof sat on the barn. The fields were cleared. The rust was being scraped away, replaced by fresh paint. The work was hard, physical, and honest, and it was healing Jack in ways he never thought possible. He sat on the newly repaired porch swing, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Rex lay at his feet, his head resting on Jack's boot. The dog was healthy now, his coat thick and shining, his eyes clear and bright. The ghosts of the past were still there, for both of them, but they were quieter now. They were companions, not tormentors. Eris came out of the house, handing him a plate of scrambled eggs. She had become a fixture at the farm, her quiet strength and gentle compassion a balm to his scarred soul. They weren't a couple, not in the traditional sense. They were something more elemental. They were survivors, building a new kind of family from the wreckage of their past. He was dreaming last night, Eris said, nodding toward Rex. His paws were twitching. I think he was running through a field somewhere with Liam. Jack nodded, a lump forming in his throat. I like to think so. He reached down and scratched Rex behind the ears. The dog leaned into his touch, a deep, contented sigh escaping its chest. He looked out over his land, at the life he was building. He had found Rex, or maybe Rex had found him. In saving the dog, he had been forced to save himself. He had reawakened his sense of purpose, his code of honor. He was no longer a ghost. He was a guardian, a protector. He had a new mission. The sun climbed higher, chasing the last of the shadows from the valley. Jack Callahan, the broken warrior, took a deep breath of the clean morning air. He was scarred, he was still healing. But he was whole, he was home, and he was not alone.